All right. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to be chatting with you today. If you could just share a little bit about yourself and what you're currently doing right now.
Yeah, so my name's Emily Jane Sarroff, and I am a business coach in Australia. I've been in the coaching industry for a bit over 3 years now. But really, like my journey started in a totally different space. I was studying my Masters of Architecture when I had this pull on my heart to really start to pivot and start to explore a different career path, which was really massive for me because at the time I was just 22 years old and my entire life had been focused towards actually building a career in architecture. So I was like 6 months away from being like out into the open and like fully, got all the qualifications that I need to be building my career further from there. And I was all of a sudden being challenged internally about exploring the potential of a different path. So I lent into that tug, and I'm sure there's lots that we could chat about with that today. So I won't give it all away straight away, but I lent into that tug that was on my heart and decided to give myself permission to explore what it might look like starting my own business. And that led me to taking some radical actions, such as dropping out of my master's degree with only 6 months left to go, and also quitting my 9 to 5 job in the architecture industry to go all in on starting a business.
Wow, that is incredible. And yes, I want to dive into all of that, but I got chills because it's just like when you start to feel like this isn't right and you actually go and identify like why or what could this mean, and you're just curious and you're open to maybe there's a different maybe there's a different path for me, because I think that so many times people get on a path and then it's like, okay, well, I chose to do this career path, right? And I chose this degree. And so now I guess I have to find a job that is this degree, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
actually, you don't. You get permission to do whatever the heck you want in this life. So I love that. Can you take us back to, I'm curious, what was like the first inkling? Like, what was like the first, like, maybe this isn't it. Maybe I don't want to do
Mm,
this forever. Like, what was that?
yeah.
What was that for you?
Well, that very first inkling actually came up before my master's. So I was in my final degree or my final year of the actual bachelor's degree. And I started to feel that inkling come up of like, oh, I don't know, I don't really love what I'm doing. Like, is there more? And at that time, I started to explore the world of network marketing. And I was seeing, this potential of online freedom that other people my age were ultimately creating. And the ability to actually start making money online really started to come into my awareness. Now, I lent into network marketing and I dabbled in that, but I never really saw any, notable success. There was something that wasn't quite in alignment for me. And now I know it was because I was selling someone else's brand and someone else's product instead of selling myself. Right. And so I just lent into that space that then eventually led me to starting my podcast as well, which then I realized, okay, this podcasting thing is really lighting a bit of a fire inside of me. And so then that's when I started to lean deeper and deeper into that when I was in my master's degree, because I decided to move forward with my master's because I didn't really know what else there was to do, right? So I was 6 months into my master's degree. I was 6 months into building the Empower With Them podcast. And that little flame that was ignited at the launch of that podcast had grown bigger and bigger and bigger. And so that was the thing that was really telling me like, okay, like your passions, your heart is pulling you into this direction, but your head's keeping you stuck in the path that you're currently on. And so I listened into that, feeling that was building and building and building for me, the more that I was actually creating around my podcast. And that was the thing that was like the inner knowingness that was nudging me towards a different path.
Wow, I love that. I think that so many times we maybe were programmed along the way, or maybe, we grew up too much and like we don't remember to like listen to our gut instincts so much. We don't go back into our inner knowing and actually like check in. We're so in our head that it's like, oh, like you don't even allow, like it comes up for a second and you're like, nope, I'm gonna swallow that right back down because that's
Yeah.
scary. you know?
Yeah, it's a big thing. And like it's a question I get asked as well as like, how did I know how to listen to that at the age of 22? Because 22 is like very young, right? But I guess I am someone who is like extremely kinesthetic. Like I'm a big feeler. And I also know that I'm a big emotional decision maker. So I've experienced like smaller decisions in the past and smaller experiences of just like this inner knowingness that, you know, my emotions are pulling me in a certain direction. And so I feel like in that moment where that feeling started to come up for me, I was already a bit familiar of like what that was. You know, I had listened to it before and I had allowed myself to follow it in smaller situations, which then kind of gave me that like sense of knowing of like, yeah, if this is coming up, give yourself permission. But the other thing as well was I knew how I was feeling towards my podcast, and then I had a totally different feeling towards my degree. And
Mm.
that was a massive indication as well of which one actually felt good. And so when I thought of the podcast, like it lit me up. I was energized. I was excited. Like I wanted to be doing that. But then when I thought about my degree, it was the total opposite. Like I was miserable. I knew that if I continued to allow that feeling to build, I would be very depressed, you know, in a short matter of months. And so I kind of like paid attention to the two different feelings that I was experiencing in my reality and actually asked myself, like, which one do I want to feel more of? And which one do I want to feel less of? And then that really helped me with guiding that emotional decision making process as well.
Oh, that's great.
Mm.
So you decide like, okay, this isn't really like fueling me, and this, the podcast is really lighting me up. Um, what did you do after that? Like, how did you just quit the masters and jump into the coaching, or how did you make that pivot?
Yeah, it was a big process. Like it wasn't just, you know, I had this feeling and I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And then all of a sudden, like I fully backed myself and went all in. Like I
Yeah.
had that feeling there, but there was this massive conflict going on because, you know, logically I'm being pulled into one direction of I only have 6 months left to go. You may as well finish this. You've invested so much time, energy, and money into this degree. Like, who are you to quit right now? That's such a waste. Versus that other side of my heart being like, okay, but there's something more. Like, let's explore this. So it was like there was a tug of war that was actually going on within me at that time. And again, like I'm 22 years old, it was a very overwhelming emotional experience to go through. And so there were actually many nights where I would just cry and have these little meltdowns and I would try to journal, which was a really key thing for me then, like journal and process and make sense of my thoughts and feelings. So there's just a lot of self-reflection that happened for quite a while. And I even sat with that whole concept of potentially leaving my degree for probably, you know, almost 6 months in itself, right? Because I knew in my fourth year, in my last year of my bachelor's, that I wasn't 100% on doing my master's. And even though I stepped into my master's, there was still that thought of like, okay, but maybe there's something more, maybe there's something more. So it took a lot of time of actually like sitting with that before I fully leant in and took the action. And I guess that was because there was an element of like lack of clarity around
Mm.
what I actually wanted to do. Like I find that it's so much easier to take action when you have clarity around what you're taking action towards. So I needed to actually like create that clarity around my vision for starters. And then from there, like anchoring into that self-trust of like, yes, if I lean into this vision, like I will figure out how to make it work.
Okay, awesome. I love that. And I think it's so true. And I love that you shared that it wasn't overnight, because I think that so many times we're seeing, people make these like, or they say like, okay, I just decided to do this and now, I'm
Yeah.
successful in this role, and I used to do that. Like it's not overnight. It does take
No,
time. It is a process. And I think that learning and leaning into yourself more and more shows you kind of the path forward. And
definitely.
it's always so much growth and so much personal development goes into it when you're making those big decisions. It's really diving in deep to understand yourself a little bit more, understand what could this actually look like, and then kind of building and designing that around that clarity that you found. So
Exactly.
so then you went into coaching. Is that the moment that you decided like got the clarity and all of that? And what did you start first?
Yes and no. So I got the clarity that I didn't want to be in my degree. And I asked myself the question of, you know, do I want to spend the next 6 months getting that piece of paper? Or do I want to spend the next 6 months actually putting a plan in place to figure out what else it is that I want to do? And I knew that if I spent the next 6 months working towards my master's, then I was going to be in a very bad place with my mental health. Right. So for me, like it made the most sense to defer my degree. So that gave me kind of like this sense of security that I'm giving myself the space. But if I decide that I do actually want to go back to my degree, I haven't just sacrificed all that hard work that I did put in. Right. So that was the first step, was deferring. Then once I deferred, I gave myself a timeline. I said, in the next 90 days, I'm going to have a plan built out of exactly what I'm going to do for my business. So I put my head down, I started brainstorming, and then that's where I came up with the idea to start a coaching business connected to my podcast, because I already had a community that was building around that. So the next 90 days, I was mapping out, starting to figure out, well, how the heck do I actually build this business? What do I call it? How do I launch it? What am I offering? How do I sell? All of that. And the goal was, by the end of the 90 days, I would hand in my letter of resignation for work, because I would have a very clear plan of how I would move forward. So it gets to the end of the 90 days. I've got a plan, but I'm not yet making any money in my business. And so I knew I was still going to quit. I knew I was going to pull the plug and just give myself the full space now that I had the clarity of what I was doing. But I also knew that I wanted to have a little bit of a security blanket for when I did do that. So in the lead up to that day, I was saving every single paycheck that came through. I ended up saving about $10,000 for when I did quit my job. And 2 weeks before I left my job forever, I came across a random man on the internet who said he had what I was looking for. Now, what was I looking for? I was looking for an actual strategy of how to actually launch and build my business, how to actually make it profitable, how to get an income rolling in. So I jump on the phone, I have a call with him. He's telling me about his program. It sounds incredible, exactly what I'm looking for. And then it came to the price. And I had two options. Option A, hold on to that $10,000 security blanket that I had been saving for literally the next week when I'm going to be full-time in my business, or invest that $10,000 into that mentor to get the strategy to help me make my first six figures. And so I knew that I wanted to run, right? I wasn't taking all of these big leaps, like leaving my degree, leaving my job to just play small. Like I was taking these big leaps to give me a sense of urgency to actually run and make this business work. And so I knew logically what I needed to do was invest in the support, because where I was at that point in time, I did not have the knowledge or skill set that was required to actually start making money in my business. So I decided to make that investment. And within the first 10 weeks, I ended up making the full investment back. And within the first 8 months of being full-time in my business, I hit my first six figures.
Oh, that's
And that
awesome.
all came down as a result of those risks that I was willing to take and backing myself in that transition I was making.
I love that. That's amazing. And I think that it's so important to a couple of the things that you mentioned, like kind of triggered me, like the community aspect of like building
Mm.
that community, I think is so key because you're building in those supporters, you're building in the mentors, the friendships, the people that are going to have your back and they're with you, like they get it, they know you, like your community or your people. And then the investment, like investing in yourself, investing in your business. I think it's so important, and I think that sometimes, that looks like paid mentorships or coaching programs. Sometimes that looks like personal development, whatever it looks like that you need in this moment. I think it's important. And, you were kind of having to weigh, the risk and decide, is this risk worth it? And yeah, it is, because you were like really serious about your business and you didn't want to play around or go small or take forever, right? It's like sometimes these
Yeah.
investments can help us just leap forward by getting the knowledge that we need. So I love that. So
Thank
so now you are helping others kind of do the same. What does that look like for you right now in your coaching business?
Yeah. So, when I first launched my business, I was in the mindset and empowerment coaching space. And that's where I made my first six figures. But then after having grown so rapidly, there was so many people in my audience who, wanted to learn how I saw that success and wanted me to really duplicate what I did for them. And so then that was the point where I was like, okay, there's a demand for me to be stepping into the business coaching space. Why don't I make a transition and see how that goes? And I've never looked back. The last 2.5 years now has been fully centered around business coaching. And this truly is my zone of genius because it's a creative outlet for me. I'm an extremely creative person. And so my creative mind comes into play in the problem solving and the design elements of business, right? Which has been able to allow my clients to see such massive success. So, who I actually help now is that old version of myself, that ambitious, aspiring entrepreneur who knows they are made for more. They know they want more freedom, more impact, more money in their life, but they don't know how to get there. So, what I do is I help you build out the foundations of your business so that you can create more of all of that in your life.
That's awesome.
Mm.
And do you do like, is it through group coaching? Is it through one-on-one? Like, what does that look
Yeah.
like?
I have so many different levels of support. My main level for this, caliber of client that comes in is my Aligned Coaching Academy, which is a mastermind, which does include the one-to-one, the group, the trainings, absolutely everything. It's like that beautiful hybrid masterpiece to just give you every inch of support that you need. But I also offer one-to-one coaching for, the person who is like really wanting to run and is wanting that high frequency of access to me and that even higher level of personalization and customization within your business as well.
Okay, very cool. Love that. And we'll link everything so that everyone listening can go find you and connect with you and all of the things.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what advice would you give someone out there that's like kind of in that space of I know I'm made for more. I know there's something more. A lot of my listeners are people who are maybe still working that 9 to 5 job, and they've got the degree and they're in the job and they're kind of like, is this it? Like, is this it? What would you advice would you give when they're starting to have those questions and getting curious about what could be next for them, but they're not really sure like where to go, what to do next, what to think about.
Yeah. The biggest thing would be to give yourself permission to get curious and to start asking questions. So when those feelings and those thoughts come up around, well, maybe I could lean into this, or maybe this is an idea that I want to explore, instead of feeding into the limiting beliefs of like, yeah, but who am I to do that? Or I couldn't make that possible. I want you to get curious about the opposite. What might it look like if you did lean in? What might you be able to create for your life? Or who might you need to become in order to have all of that? So start to ask those questions that really do align with that direction you are being pulled towards. Because one of the biggest mistakes people make is when they feel that pull, they start to justify the opposite. They start to justify why they can't have the thing, why they're unqualified, or why they're not good enough, right? But if you can start justifying why you should lean into that direction and the potential of what you could be creating over there, that's when you'll find that things will start to fall into place for you.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And I think for me, I'm getting a lot better at it, but I used
Yeah.
to really be hung up on like the how. Do you get that a lot? Like, okay, I want to do all these things and I have the clarity and I have the vision, but how
Yeah.
do I do it? How do I start? Like the how
Yeah.
gets people so wrapped up and then you're just like frozen because you're like, I don't
Yeah.
know how. I
Yeah.
don't know how, like you're just like, I mean, that's when you come in, right? And you show us the how.
Mhm. That's exactly it. Like, you don't need to know the how. You don't need to know the how. You just need to know what. What is it that you're moving towards, and why are you wanting to move towards that? When you are crystal clear on that, the how starts to fall into place, right? So maybe that means starting to look for someone who has the solution for you, who you can bring into your business and actually have them creatively map out the strategy for you to get to that place that you want to be. Or maybe it means just asking yourself the question of, how could I get resourceful to start to figure out what steps to take? And when you're asking that question, you'll start to come up with solutions like, maybe I can go on the internet, maybe I can read a book, maybe I can see who in my network is connected with someone who could connect me with someone, right? So, really, again, like, start asking the questions that you're looking for. So, if you don't know the how, start to think about, how could I figure out the how? Or who do I know that could show me the how?
Yeah.
Mm.
I also am here recently just really diving into energy. So wanted to
Mm.
hear your thoughts on the energy, right? Because actually I maybe a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I never heard anything about energy. And then all of a sudden people started talking. They're like, "Oh, I love your energy." And I'm like, "What does that mean?" Like, what does
Yeah.
that mean? And so I'm like, I'm kind of dabbling, but what are your thoughts on like your energy and how you show up and how you visualize and how you think through, what could be possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different layers to energy. Of course, there's like the physical energy, but then there's also the energy that we emit, which is almost like I like to kind of address it as like our authenticity, right? Because an example of this is I hosted my first in-person event on the weekend, and the biggest compliment that I received from everyone was, "I love your energy. I love how authentic you are." And we can feel that clearly. So when we're talking about like energy in business, yeah, there's like the physical energy of being a high performer and how to best optimize that. But then there's also this other perspective of energy, which is connected to your authenticity and which creates an element of magnetism in business where you are just radiating your true authentic self. And naturally, what that does is that attracts the people who are aligned with that and brings them into your sphere, right? And then that's where we start to attract those dreamy clients, those dreamy connections, or maybe it's even a coach you attract in who's just so aligned with that energy that you're wanting to step into. So it is a massive thing when it comes to business, particularly from that branding, that marketing, that sales perspective, because when you are selling yourself, people aren't buying what you're saying, they're buying what they're feeling, they're buying what they're receiving from your energy, and energy doesn't lie.
Hmm. I love that. I love that so much. I'm like, I want to learn all like more about it and all the things, but I'm like, it's so true. And what I
Yeah.
have to be really mindful of is people that like I don't know how to say it, but like energy vampires that like steal my
Yeah.
energy or like suck my energy, like they just drain
Yeah.
you. The people that are just so negative and so down. And it's like, whoa, I have to really work hard to put up a barrier, like a boundary. Like, I am not going to allow that to pour into me because it can be contagious both ways, right?
Yeah.
Positive or negative. So I'm like, oh, can't have any of
Yeah.
that today.
I think
I gotta
something
say
that's
high
like a really
vibe.
Yeah, I think something that's a really like interesting point on that as well, because we attract our projections, right? And so if these sorts of people who are energy vampires are coming into your life, then maybe it's a good opportunity to even reflect and ask yourself, how is this me? Like, where am I actually creating leaky boundaries within myself and my own energy, right? And how am I maybe in ways that I'm unaware of being a bit of an energy vampire to myself,
Mhm.
right? Because when you seal up those gaps within yourself, you're not going to be creating space and you're not going to be calling that in either, right? Because we attract like what resonates with us. And if that's what's being called in, then I definitely challenge you to ask yourself, like, how is this me? Where do I actually need to tighten up my own energy? And, maybe the energy or the thoughts that I'm feeding myself or the leaky boundaries that I might have in place currently.
Yeah, so true. So true. I will definitely think about that because yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Um, okay, what advice would you give someone out there that is kind of having all of those negative thoughts? Like they're just in a swirl of this negative self, worth. They don't think that they're worthy of whatever the
Mm.
calling on their heart could be. They don't feel that they are worth whatever it might be, the work it takes or the pivot. I mean, it's not easy. And it's like to be able to step into something that you're really passionate about. I think there's a lot of uncomfortable, things that you have to do. There's a lot of comfort zones that you have to get out of. And so, what advice would you give someone that maybe doesn't think that they're worth it?
Yeah. Choose a new story, right? Stop choosing the story that you're not worth it, right? Choose the opposite. Start justifying why you are worth it. Start telling yourself the story of why you are worth it. At the end of the day, it's not easy, but it is simple. It is just a choice. Our thoughts and our beliefs, they're choices that we make. We choose to believe we're not worthy. We choose to believe we're not good enough. Or you could choose the opposite. Choose to believe you are worthy. Choose to believe you are good enough and justify why that is true instead of justifying why the opposite is true.
Yes. Oh,
Mm,
that's so good. And I think that it's hard for some people to understand how simple it can be for them,
yeah,
right? It's like it can be easy, it can be simple if we
yeah,
allow it to be, right? And it's also
yeah,
like it is a choice. I mean, so much of this is like a decision to be brave, a
yeah,
decision to go and quit the degree or quit the path that you are on and decide that you are worth it and you're worth whatever the calling is inside of you. And it can
yeah.
change at any time.
And simple is not necessarily always easy, but it gets to get easier. Now,
Yeah.
at first, if you're very new to creating that shift, then it's going to be a bit harder and it's going to take more practice. But with time, with practice, like anything, you get better at it. And so even when you're, where you are, maybe where I am in my business journey right now, those limiting beliefs don't go away. The self-doubt is still there. I felt it all come up before I ran my first event on the weekend, right? But what you get better at is reprogramming those thoughts, choosing new thoughts. You get quicker at it, you get better at it. And so the more that you can actually practice doing that, the better you're going to get at it with time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also it's like, okay, you're shifting your thoughts and then take action. Like take
Yes.
action. Okay, I'm scared of the thing. I'm scared of the first event that I'm going to host, but I'm going to
Yes.
shift some thoughts and just go for it. And
Yes.
then you get that practice, you build that muscle, and then okay, what's the next thing? Then the next
Mm,
event that comes up isn't so scary. It isn't so hard, right? It's like, oh, well, I've done this before and I didn't die. So I can do it again.
exactly. Exactly that.
Yeah. Yeah. I do some events as well. And so I've felt that exact thing. Like, oh my gosh, this is
Yeah.
so terrifying. What do I do? Like Googling the night before, like all the things that like, did I forget? What did I forget? Like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
how to run this event. Like, okay, yeah. But then you do it.
Yeah.
And I think what you said earlier about being authentic, when you truly like know who you are, love who you show up in that way, you show up to serve, you show up with love, and that shows more than anything else. Like people
Yeah.
can feel that, even if like something went wrong, or I mean, nothing's perfect, right? Nothing is going to be absolutely perfect. You're going to learn something,
Yeah.
grow, do something different next time, whatever it might be. But even if something goes wrong, it's like you're still showing up authentically and you're connecting and you're showing who you are. And those people that are right for you are going to love you.
And a big thing in that is just self-trust as well, right? Like if you can really just trust yourself that, you will pull through, you will figure it out. And even if you do fail, that you will be okay, then
Yeah.
that's all you need.
Yeah, I think that's a big piece for sure. Like just trusting yourself and also thinking back to like, okay, well, even when you're talking about, okay, I've felt this before and I've trusted this feeling and I can trust myself again, right? Like reminding yourself like, you know what? I got myself through this hard time and this hard
Yeah.
time and this hard time. I can get myself through this, right?
Yeah.
Like your past is your proof. Like you can do it. So, okay,
Exactly.
I have absolutely loved this conversation. I would love if you could just share where everyone can connect with you.
Yeah, I'm super easy to find on socials. I'm Empower with M on all platforms. So Instagram is where I am most active. Come say hi. Let me know that you've come from this podcast episode. Otherwise, if you want to check out my podcast, it's the Empower with M podcast streaming on all platforms.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation.